Hello and welcome to the CS Ed podcast, a podcast where we talk about teaching computer science with computer science educators. I am your host, Kristen Stevens Martinez, an associate professor of the practice at Duke University. Joining me today is Irene Ho, PhD student at UC San Diego in the Design Lab. Irene, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Happy to be here.
So Irene, first I'd like to ask you, how did you get to where you are today? What got you interested in computing that led to a PhD program?
So I actually started out as a UX lead at a startup for a couple years before I came into my PhD program. But while I was working at this startup, I read a book that I thought was pretty meaningful. It's called The Alignment Problem by Brian Christian, which is about how difficult it is to align human values to AI systems. So as I was kind of reading this book, I became very curious about the people that enter this field and work on this problem, right? And a lot of that sort of stuff starts in education. So I reached out to Dr. Stephen McNeil at the Temple University Lab. We'd previously worked together on some other projects at UCSD, and then we started working together on some of the papers that are out now.
Oh, I was kind of curious how you seem to have published so soon in your PhD program, while at the same time knowing that you didn't do it with your advisor, Phil.
Yeah, because I knew Steve for a very long time. We'd done some prior work together in the proto lab at UCSD, but I was an undergraduate researcher. Uh, and then when he left and started, his lab at Temple, I went with him. So even when I was working at the startup, I was still working with him and mentoring his students, and very interested in his vision on this like very big education focused lab where we have a lot of undergrads involved. We're bringing a lot of mentorship to them, so I was frequently trying to teach some UX stuff, and then I kind of transitioned into a research role there.
Oh, that's so cool. So you, like almost everyone, have an interesting path that led you to where you are today.
Yeah, definitely. I didn't even know what a PhD was until until like that year I started working with Steve. So
Oh.
yeah, it was a big transition for me.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. And now as a PhD student, it's probably also a noticeable transition since you were in industry for a couple of years.
Yeah. But I really love it. I am a big fan of the community, especially the computing education community. You guys are so friendly, and I have been really enjoying like going to these conferences and just getting to meet people.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
so glad. All right. So this episode is my first episode on my podcast where we're really actually talking about AI. I've kind of avoided it for my podcast in the past, mainly because I felt like the variability and kind of like the all over the place was too high to really feel like I could have an episode that would hit the right note, because I couldn't tell where the right notes were. And now that we've had it around for a couple of years, I feel like the also like the strong feelings around often like the exhaustion of, oh no, I just finished the pandemic and now I have to deal with AI and interrupting my teaching. I
Mhm.
feel like now is the time to start thinking about it. And so that's one reason why when I saw your paper, which is the main thing we'll be talking about in this episode, I really felt like this seems like a good note to start, because to me, I'm not anti-AI. I am,
Mhm.
let's be careful with AI and think about it carefully rather than just throwing it in and hope that the students swim. So as a quick tease, what would you say is the higher order bit key takeaway of your paper?
So I think the highest level tease here is that generative AI is changing how students seek help. And these changes can be negative, right? Some students report some isolation, it's disrupting peer learning communities. And then, for us as educators, we might have to look for new ways to foster this meaningful social connection and learning.
So let's start with, what do you mean by reshaping students' help seeking so that we can help the audience better understand what's leading to these negative outcomes?
Yeah. So when I first started this work, I was most curious about how students were using generative AI, but more importantly, why, right?
Mm-hmm.
We know kind of like the obvious. It's like, oh, it's fast, it's really high quality, it's incredibly beneficial for students who need a lot of support. And when I was talking to these students, we started noticing this trend where they found that this access was so high quality, so helpful, so great, available all the time, that it was kind of superseding literally everything else and everyone else. So it was positioning generative AI as something that was beating out their peers, beating out, professors, beating out their TAs. It was preferable to office hours. And as we kind of heard this preference change from students, it's obviously beating out like forums on the internet, all the internet search stuff as well. We started thinking about, okay, well, that's a pretty big shift, right? It's
Yes.
better than Google search for sure. We knew students were already relying on the internet for these sort of things. But now it's kind of taking away from that. Maybe you need help with lab homework. So instead of going to lab office hours or going to the lab itself, you're just staying home and asking AI. And we wondered how this was going to change how students interacted with each other and within the classroom.
Okay. And so how did you go about trying to investigate this question?
So the first paper we kind of looked at just a mixed methods survey and interview. In this paper, after we kind of observed that early trend, this paper we really dove down and we focused mainly on interviews. So we interviewed 17 students across 7 universities, and we just really tried to get to know them as well, like who they are, because their perspective I think is all a little bit different, and that really contributed to a more like rich set of qualitative data.
Yeah. And let's be precise. Which paper are we talking about?
Yeah, the 17 student paper is the All Roads Lead to ChatGPT, How Generative AI is Eroding Social Interactions and Student Learning Communities.
And that was at?
This is IDICE, 2025.
So given all the people that you interviewed, you mentioned that you wanted to make sure you really got to know them.
Mhm.
So what traits about them kind of connect to some of the main findings that you had in your paper?
Yeah, yeah. I had one of these students that I spoke to who actually had left university for 2 years, and then she came back after AI came out. So she was gone for some time. And she was a lot older than some of these other students. She was a computer science student at a university, R1 University. And she talked about this notable shift. It was very apparent to her because when she came back, she said that it became this like all roads lead to ChatGPT. Like it was all these students were talking about, and she just kind of felt lost. It was a culture shock for her. She used those words, culture shock, which kind of suggests that these interactions where students are no longer going to each other as much for help, or they're frequently relying on generative AI, kind of suggests that this might have evolved into a norm for help seeking. And she was very explicit about how it was this had been a change. I think the biggest thing that she mentioned was that she herself actually didn't use AI. She was someone that actively tried to avoid it, did not think it was helpful for her, or had personal reasons for not using it. And these changes were impacting her, even though she had not used these tools. So, an example of this would be she would go to a friend for help because she was struggling with some programming assignment. And she messaged her friend, or she would talk to her friends, and they would answer her questions by sending her copy and pasted responses from ChatGPT. And so for her, that really, bothered her as well, because she sometimes felt like vulnerable in that, reaching out for help, asking for help, and getting that sort of generated response. Um, and that was difficult for her.
I remember reading that part in your paper, and it reminded me of like back when I was a college student, so like way back at this point. It reminded me so much of "Let me Google that for you,"
Mm,
where like people were still learning how to do internet search. Technically, like we weren't born knowing how to do it, and some people were better than others. And those of us that were better did have a bit of an attitude, I think, around others who asked us a stupid quote unquote question.
mm.
And the response sometimes was, "Let me Google that for you." And there was actually a website called "Let me Google that for you." And you could put a search query in there, and then you would get back a link that, if you send it to somebody, would show them a animation of like going to Google, clicking on the search bar and typing in that thing, and then hitting enter, and it would serve them the results from Google. Which, now that I am much older, I apologize to all of my family and friends who I did that to.
Do you think that was something that people did to actually be helpful, or was it more of just like a joke, sort of like, hey, like you can just look it up, sort of thing?
Speaking for myself, it was me like going, don't ask me this stupid question. Like,
I
why
see.
didn't you Google this for yourself first before asking me this question? And the only time I ever really remember doing it was to my sister.
Okay.
In
Well,
my defense, at least it was my sister
yeah,
that
that
I did
makes
this
sense.
to. I think the vast majority of the time I wasn't that big of a mean person, but I do remember doing it to my sister at least once, where she asked me what I interpreted as a stupid question. Where like, if you Google that, you will the first hit will help you.
That,
Um,
that that's interesting because I think like with students in generative AI, from what I noticed, it's not so much like, hey, like I think that's a stupid question. It's more like, hey, I'm too lazy to provide you the answer
hmm,
or engage in this interaction. That's something students expressed, where it was like,
interesting.
oh, it was just very it's like much easier or more convenient for Gen AI to kind of break it down for you instead of
Hmm.
me, even if it's
Yeah,
just like a couple, a
yeah.
couple words.
Though my impression from the paper, though, is that there was also a sense of shame around not being able to like the. I don't. Do you remember that part of the paper? I don't know how to
Yeah.
express it right.
Yes, yeah. Okay, so to explain, I also think this is rapidly evolving. So, I think that some students are developing different attitudes around this, especially depending on the classroom setting, especially the culture of the university, maybe even the country. But in this subset of students during this period of time, and I do think this is still common, but what we saw were, especially in classrooms, right? Or in lecture halls, or maybe in more in-person settings, students would minimize or even close the tabs that showed generative AI usage during these classroom settings because they expressed fears of being perceived or judged as lazy, stupid, or foolish. From their AI usage. They were kind of scared to use it publicly because they didn't want to be looked down upon as someone that needed this AI assistance. So we had like a quote from students who were saying that, oh, like I'm afraid, it makes me look kind of dumb, or even though I have permission to use it in class, I don't want my classmates to know that I'm using it to pass this class or to get help. Other students even expressed, like from the other side, they were like, oh, hey, I think students who use these tools or rely on these tools are actually less intelligent. So it's kind of this, on both sides, some students are judging others for usage while they're using it a lot privately at home or maybe with their friends.
So, was there any shame? Like, I think the part that I'm wondering about that's kind of equating to the let me Google that for you is the shame felt by someone who received a chat log
Mhm.
from a friend when they asked that friend for help. Did that happen at all, or am I misremembering the paper?
I don't think it was that they felt shame in receiving it. I think it was that they felt that there was this missed opportunity to connect or engage with their friend, or even like a sense of, hey, like I overcame a lot of these help seeking barriers, for example. Maybe it's scary to be like, hey, I don't know, and then I ask someone for help and they kind of dismiss me, they don't engage with me, and it's more of that emotional fulfillment, I think, that camaraderie that these students suddenly feel like they're missing, like they're working on something hard together and their friends not willing to engage or interact with them on it, more so maybe than shame. But I'm just spitballing here because we're kind of looking at this now
Okay.
more closely. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm definitely curious about that part because I agree. This definitely would be more like part of it would be the general culture of the school and the culture that you develop in your classroom
Right,
and that
right.
kind of thing of how the students will feel about the use of AI.
Yeah. Yeah. We had students talk about how, you know, they felt more demotivated, or they felt like they were less able to show up to events where there's supposed to be other students. Typically, one of the students talked about how there used to be these homework sessions or these big office hours where everyone would go and work on homework together. But then they started noticing like students were just not showing up anymore. And this was happening both online and offline. So in like Discord communities, which is like social community platform on the internet, they saw that people no longer even sent questions in the chat, so there was less opportunity for conversations to start kind of organically at all.
Yeah.
And so that was, I think, bothering her more than maybe the one-on-one interaction. Because with your friends, and I did have a student talk about this, like he was like, oh, with my friends, like I actually feel a little bit safer talking about my usage of AI tools. I feel like I'm able to, the closer I am to them, it's okay for me to be transparent about my usage. I feel, like I won't be judged by them. They'll understand that I need help. But, not all students start out with so many friends in their computing classrooms. They come in with different backgrounds, different resources. So that's another factor as well.
Yeah. I think after reading your paper, I was like kind of depressed about what seemed to me like the social fabric fraying
Mhm.
and lack of weaving of the social fabric. Partially, it seemed because of ChatGPT and its convenience, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, yeah. Because in earlier work, one of the biggest things that we heard from students about help seeking was that they had a lot of fears in general about these social emotional experiences, right? They get anxious, they worry about appearing stupid, they don't want to harm maybe the trust and relationships they've already cultivated. That social cost suddenly seems a lot bigger when you have this really available and helpful, really nice, never going to disagree with you or
Yeah.
never going to make a social mistake, right? Um, they feel like that cost suddenly increases, but then that impacts everyone in the community, not just the students who use AI.
Yeah. Are there any positives in this paper?
I think it's a pretty grim, grim paper. I mean, I did have students talk. So some students were aware, so that they knew and they had noticed this, and they were able to reflect on it. And some of these students were very explicit about what they knew they were trading off. So sometimes they did make the decision to engage with the peer. One student talked about how he knew that his friends motivated him more when he worked with his friends because he felt that they all had these different passions and interests and stories. He's inspired by this friend that worked with a startup recently, and this
Hmm.
friend was just talking so much about it, and he became interested in the same startup or the same system that the friend worked on just because he saw that passion.
Hmm.
And so kind of the drive, I mean, this is a quote from the paper, but it's like the drive, unique interests and passions of one's peers and community can't be replicated by Gen AI. And some
Yeah.
students are aware of that.
Yeah. Given what you said about the passionate piece that got another student excited because their friend was so passionate about this project,
Mhm.
I feel like for some of the results of your interview study, the takeaway might be we have to ban Gen AI so that we can get the social fabric weaving again. And I feel like to me, it's out of the box. Like you can't put it back in. We got to work with what we got. And so, is that a potential entry point where rather than having the students basically talk about what they used to talk about, which is like, this homework is terrible, I'm struggling so hard, help me with this thing, which is like an easy thing, are we going to have to partially struggle to figure out what are the things that we can have the students talk about that in some ways will be not as easy. It is easy to complain about homework, um, but will get that social fabric weaving going again.
Yeah, I agree with your first part 100%. It's like, AI is out of the box. There's no going back from this stage. I think a big part of that is that even as educators, if you try to ban these tools in the classroom, that isn't necessarily going to change anything meaningful for students because
Mm-hmm.
the same students will still rely on these tools regardless. But what we can do, and I think that's kind of what you're getting towards, is I also agree that homework is not the most invigorating conversation with peers or
Yeah.
your classmates. But it's more about, I think, opportunities for students to engage in social interaction spontaneously in the classroom. And this is, again, early work, and I'm spitballing a bit, but I think a lot of the things that helped in the past in these lecture settings for very large lectures, like think pair shares, having students involved in, unfortunately, group projects, things like this, I think, are much more beneficial for naturally getting students to talk to each other again. Even something like, hey, we don't use generative AI in the lecture hall or in the classroom. Questions that we want to ask each other here, at least in this in-person space, are for each other. But whatever you do outside of the classroom and the lecture hall, there's nothing that we can really control on that end. um or even things like those homework parties, or encouraging students to show up for extra credit. It's more about encouraging students to show up and not be scared. I think a lot of students have a lot of fear when it comes to these sort of things. They have very little incentive to, so
Hmm.
kind of working in that direction, strategies that get students talking might be a
Yeah.
really good first step.
Yeah, that's definitely, I feel like for me, I've had that kind of percolating in my brain since the pandemic, because like I wanted to provide students a reason why to come to class in person, even when I'm like teaching hybrid and you can technically zoom in and that kind of thing. And I definitely have shifted over time, where at first I ran my like post CS2 data science elective class hybrid, where you could choose last minute even whether or not you were going to attend in person or over Zoom. And then I shifted to like, no, you got to ask every time. You got to like
Mm,
message, you got to basically, you have to plan to be on Zoom that day, because you have to ask me, you have to fill out a form, and then I'll email you the password for the day. Or like you fill out the form and you get the password after you hit the submit button, but you cannot, like, so technically yes, you could still do it last minute, but there's a record and there's you explaining to me in that moment why you have to be on
mhm.
Zoom, to force that reflection moment for them.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. I really like that.
um but like to me, like I still want to teach hybrid, because there will always be students who I'm like, I know you're sick but your
Mhm,
brain's functioning, but please
mhm.
don't spread your germs.
Exactly.
um or but probably the most common reasons I get nowadays is like, I have an interview right before or after this class, or I am traveling to a thing but I still can attend class because I'm like stuck on a bus because I'm an athlete. Like, and those are the reasons I'm like, I don't want that to be a reason why you can't attend class. And yes, it's not going to be as good as if you're in person, but at least it's better than nothing. Because
Right,
I
right.
know students, they're not going to watch the recording even if the recording is there. Like this, that's what the statistics say, and I accept that reality. It's still like the recording is there because it's by default and it like happens automatically, so I don't have to do anything. um but yeah, so like I adopted peer instruction, think bear share, group discussion, all of those things very
Mhm.
early, because the framing that I landed on was the usefulness of coming in person is that you get to talk to your peers, and
Right.
this is more valuable to like, I'm trying to bring into the classroom the making that more valuable than doing it on your own,
Mhm.
by having these kinds of discussions in person with each other. And I think for me, the thing that I struggle with a little bit is that at the beginning of the semester, they're all willing to talk to each other.
Mhm.
And then it like the volume during the peer instructions and whatever just slowly goes down, of course, whole semester. Um, and I think part of it is probably because they realize there is no incentive to actually talk to my neighbor.
Oh, interesting.
Um, because like being right during like the group question, during the group phase
Mhm.
of the peer instruction, because
Mhm.
like there's two rounds. Like the first round you answer by yourself, then you discuss with your group, and then you answer again. Like there's no incentive to being right unless you care about being right. Um, and there's no points associated with being right. So I even tried an experiment in my class where I told them, all right, everybody, vote on the bonus prize for the day. And they got to vote on if they reached 95% correct on a group, the second part
Mhm.
question for a peer instruction, they would get something. And the options were like double engagement points for the day, because engagement points is how I actually get them to come to class. They need to earn a certain number by the end of the semester. It was double engagement points, a hint of what's going to be on the exam coming up, Candy. I think I offered candy. And then I don't remember what the fourth one was. Oh, it was like a late token for everyone in the room.
Oh, wow.
Uh, and and I have a whole late token system to get so that they can submit their homework late. And so like those were the four options, and they voted, and then the winner was double engagement points for the day, because in their brain it's like, oh, double engagement points means I can skip a day in the future. And I'm like, yeah, like there's other ways to earn engagement points, so you don't always have to come to class. But there was no difference between like a day where there was no class bonus reward versus any other day. Generally, for these peer instructions at this point, the vast majority of the time, the difference percent wise between the first try and the second try is like 10%. Like about 10% of the students, like the percent correctness between the two rounds is just 10% increase. And I'm like, y'all started at 25% right. And now it's 35. Like, what happened?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to persuade people to do something that they perceive to be a lot more effort than it's worth. I think part of the problem is that students aren't aware, or they don't fully understand what they're missing. Like they don't fully understand the scope of this worth. One of the things that I mentioned, and I think this helped maybe, but no real like study on this yet. But even just being transparent with students at the beginning of the semester or the quarter, and explaining to them that at the end of the day, like all your education is technically free online. Like you really want to learn something, you can Google it. Like you can find this resource. The
Yeah.
only real value that you gain from going to university or going to this showing up to class is the ability to develop some of these soft skills, right? Because those are the skills that carry you past university. It's the skills that you need for interviewing. You need to know how to make small talk, to befriend people, in your future careers, know how to make these understand people, communicate clearly. And secondly, it's the network of people that you know in your classroom, right? You have access to all these amazing people that are here with you, who have, worked very hard to be here. And to miss out on that is really the core of maybe what university represents. It's like we're learning together, but also part of it is this really long lasting community. Some of the people that I met in university, or I met even, or even earlier than that, have continued to help me today in what I do. And they introduced me to really interesting people or interesting places, visiting them. And I'm not sure if students are maybe fully aware of that.
I don't think they're aware of that at all. Just because, like, they might have, I feel like that's not information that they would come across.
Yes, it's that hidden curriculum.
Yeah. And I think it's also, they don't even have the lived experience to believe that's true if they come across the information. Well,
Mhm.
like for us who are multiple years post college, we do have that lived experience of going, oh, the reason why I got this job or knew about this opportunity is that some weak tie, they're called weak ties in social network theory, is someone who I didn't know well, was an acquaintance, is a weak
Mhm.
tie, knew about the thing and let me know. Or like someone who knew me, someone else who knew that person who knew me, knew that if they cold emailed me about an opportunity, I would respond.
Right.
And so like that friend, that weak tie said, yeah, totally email Kristen about this idea, and she will probably at least like engage with you about it. And
Right.
so that encouragement then gets that person who doesn't know me to email me about an opportunity. And
Mhm.
so like those kinds of experiences of just lived experience makes you believe like, yeah, be nice to everyone around you and like be pleasant to work with, and that will play dividends throughout the rest of your life. And yes, it is easier to talk to no one and stand at the bus stop without talking to anyone nearby. Um, and that doesn't necessarily help you in the long
Mm.
run.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I mean, even for me in my community, I find I have to very much actively recognize this frequently, that like, me not showing up to this event or this meeting or something in-person gathering at my lab, I need to be aware that it's a trade-off every time I make that decision. Like me participating in my community is inconvenient. It often costs me time. It's a lot of effort. I have to commute quite far. But me missing out on it is often the same, if not more, right? It's a real trade off that you have to actively make every time, which is why I really liked what you said with the students submitting like a Google form every time they choose not to show up to class, because at the very least, like, they're reflecting on why they're not going instead of just making that decision out of ease. It's not like
Yeah.
so you're like sliding into it, you know?
I'm all about adding friction to force reflection.
Right, right. I love that so much. I actually really, really like that.
Even if it's something small, and like, but the student still feels like they have to rationalize their choice of asking for the
Right.
Zoom link, the Zoom password for the day. We're like, I'm sick right now and I didn't want to spread my germs. And
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
like, great. I read every one of your
Yeah.
responses. I know why you're not here.
It's a very tough, like, I understand too, it's tough. It gets harder and harder today, I think, with the way technology has kind of fully permeated our lives. It's made it very easy to access everything. At the same time, it affects our ability to access other things, you know?
Maybe it's almost like the next level of like how technology is making us less healthy, if you want to put it in like clickbaity terms.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
technology helped us to the point where now we have to explicitly go out and get exercise. Like we have to
Yes,
think
yeah.
about it and do
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
And same with eating healthy. Like, and now it's also to socialize, because we don't, it's so easy not to socialize. It's because then I don't get rejected and I don't have to go out and like, but then why am I lonely?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also because a lot of these tools, like generative AI, it makes it very easy to never be uncomfortable. But
Hmm.
discomfort and being uncomfortable is something that never changes in our life. I don't
Yeah.
think that it's something that can just go away if we try hard enough. In fact, it often leads
Mm,
to more discomfort just later down the line. And this
yeah.
avoidance of being uncomfortable, feeling awkward, feeling embarrassed, all of that is easier more and more to avoid, leading to cascading consequences,
Mm.
much, much farther down.
So before we close out, let's see if we can come up from this conversation of like, is there a positive that we can think of for the situation? I think one positive that I think you kind of alluded to about like fostering meaningful social connections in
Mhm,
learning, and like how can teachers, practitioners do that in their context. And I think part of that, I agree, would be just implementing active learning. But like, if you're going to do that, I recommend, if you've never done it before, I recommend like going to some of my past podcast episodes to understand about peer instruction and that kind of thing. So you understand how to uh, do it and increase your odds of success. But beyond that, I'm wondering if there's other things that we can do. Like you mentioned, talking about the value of interacting with your peers. Like,
mhm,
do you think one thing that would help would be, for example, now that I'm in the middle of the semester, I pause before at the beginning of class, right before my first peer instruction, go like, hey, everybody, I'm just going to remind you what the point of this is. It's
mhm,
not to just fill out the form so you get your points. It's about talking to your peers. And in my class, I emphasize data science communications, practicing communicating in these terms with this language and being precise and
mhm,
learning how to be able to talk to people in this kind of setting.
mhm,
But also, you mentioned talking to people to build those social ties that you might be leaning on in the future.
mhm, mhm.
Is there
Yeah.
anything else that you can think of?
I mean, just as like a small aside, there's something Steve talked about this recently with me a little bit, but I thought it was really interesting that one metric that he thinks that some, classrooms should try to measure more is, at the beginning when you came into this class, how many friends did you have? And at the
Mm,
end of this class, how many friends did you have? And that
mm,
might be something to look at to see, are these strategies actually getting students to make friends and engage with one another, right? I
mm-hmm,
think that is something that could be an interesting way to measure this sort of thing. But
mm,
at the same time, I do fully agree with like just prefacing these activities with kind of explaining clearly like the intention of them or the purpose of them. I know
mm-hmm,
sometimes students tune them out, but for the students that are on the cusp, there's always students on the cusp,
mm-hmm.
for the ones that are listening, I think that is really valuable. and it's more explicit, right? It's less like this thing that's hidden and not spoken about.
So I had 2 episodes about peer instruction with Beth Simons. She actually talked about that, where like you have to remind them every time, every day, why you're doing it. And I think she talked about a particular student she had who it didn't click until the very end of the term, where the student finally understood what the point of the peer instructions every day were. And I was like, oh, that, like, in some ways I get it, but also like, that's so frustrating. It's so frustrating that I have to repeat myself over and over again.
Yeah, I think it's hard. These students have it hard too. It's such a new generation of all these competing things for our interests and our thoughts.
Yeah.
So.
I think like every generation has it tough in some way, shape, or form. And the question is just like, what dice roll did you get for your generation?
Exactly.
And it's going to be a unique set of dice rolls. And guess what? You got to figure out how to do it because the prior generation didn't know what they were doing either.
Right.
But yeah. So I think to close out, can you? I thought of one other thing to try, but I feel like never works. So but I wish it was a thing where just to tell students, go to office hours. Like if you need to do your homework, just do it in the office hours room. The TA is not going to care that you're there. And they're right there and available to you if you do end up needing help. But at least like if you're struggling to find a place to do your homework, just do it in the office hours room. It's right there.
Yeah. I think that is just providing a space for students. I think that's important. Like they know there's somewhere they can go. So I do like that. I think there's a lot of little strategies scattered around. I think we have to look around and kind of see what other educators have been implementing, how it's been working, what hasn't been working to get a better sense. Like I know in Steve's lab, one of the really big things that he tries to focus on with his community of students. He has a very large lab. It's quite a big thing that he has to put a lot of effort into maintaining, but a lot of his undergraduates get involved in research, and for them, it becomes very intrinsically motivating to continue participating in the community because they're fascinated by what they're doing. They feel independent, like they're moving towards real world contribution. They like seeing their work being published and talked about and discussed. And I think all that also helps a lot with students that kind of experience this, like, hey, like, what's the point? Like, if AI can do it, why do I even need to be here? There's definitely aspects where students can work towards more intrinsic interest in what they do, which makes it easier for them to turn to each other, turn to their peers, like that classmate that I spoke about who had worked at that startup, right? That passion that they kind of developed that came from that intrinsic motivation.
Yeah. Intrinsic motivation is so hard to tap into.
It really is. Big words.
Right. So let's close out with too long didn't listen. What would you say is the most important thing you would want our listeners to get out of our conversation?
I think the most important thing is that while generative AI might lower some of these barriers to knowledge, it also erodes or negatively affects some of the informal peer networks that make learning meaningful, might impact mentorship, collaboration, community. And as educators, we need to rethink not just how students use AI, but how can we protect or nurture the human connections that support this belonging and motivation?
Yeah, well, future research needs to be done.
Yes.
Hopefully we'll get there someday.
A lot of future research.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Irene.
Thank you so much for letting me be here today.
And thank you for listening. If you know a colleague who'd enjoy this episode, please share it or post it on social media. It really helps us grow. Want to support the podcast? Join us on Patreon at patreon.com/CSED podcast. Particular shout out to patrons Mark Guzda, Vanessa Coot, and Yesenia Velasco for helping to keep the podcast ad-free and supporting production. For past episodes, transcripts, and links, visit csedpodcast.org, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And otherwise, this was the CS Ed Podcast. I'm your host, Kristen Stevens-Martinez, and our producer is Chris Martinez. And remember, teaching computer science is more than just knowing computer science. I hope you found something useful for your teaching today.